All right, so today we're going to look at the Nixon administration, Richard Nixon. There's a couple of interesting things that I'll get into before we kind of start talking about Nixon. He holds a few different distinctions. He becomes the only president to ever resign from the office of the presidency. So everybody that's ever been in office, they've either finished out their term, or they possibly passed away due to natural causes, assassination, whatever it may be. But Nixon was not the case. He pretty much gave a less than 24-hour notice of hey, I am resigning from the office. We'll kind of get into that later, why he does end up resigning from office. Richard Nixon is his full name. One of his nicknames is Tricky Dick. Probably one of the better nicknames for a president. Well, maybe not better is the appropriate term, but definitely funny for a president. Back in the day, if your name was Richard, Dick would have been a nickname for you. However, if anyone has the name of Richard today, typically they don't go by Dick for very obvious reasons. But we're going to talk a little bit about Nixon and just kind of some basics of his administration. So Richard Nixon, he was born in Yorba Linda, California. So if any of you have ever been to the Nixon Library, that is his presidential library. And he actually holds the distinction of being the only president from the state of California. So even though we've had a ton of people here in terms of population, only one president that was ever actually born here, and that belongs to Nixon. He and his family grew up very poor, and his house is actually still there on the land where the Richard Nixon Library is, even till this day, and you can actually tour it. Years ago, I got the opportunity to do so. It is not that big of a house. All of you have been inside my classroom. It's probably about that size and another half of the classroom. And that was the size of the house for the family of 6. It was very small. He came from very humble beginnings. He was one of four brothers. So it was a family of 6. 2 of his brothers ended up dying of tuberculosis. So like I said, a very humble background, doesn't come from that sort of silver spoon in the mouth that we've talked about with our last few presidents. He's eventually going to go to college. He'll get a degree in history. He then gets a law degree. Decides to kind of start a business. It doesn't necessarily work out so much, and he'll eventually enter into a career in politics. He does fight in World War II. So he is a member of the Navy and did some legit logistics and whatnot. One of the questions that has kind of come up is, whether or not presidents need, legit military experience in order to be able to do the job. For the most part, I would say in the last 100 years, you haven't had many. Biden, Trump, Obama, Bush, Clinton, none of them had ever really served in the military. The only few that have would have been H.W. Bush, Nixon, Kennedy, and Eisenhower. Truman also kind of served a little bit as well. But he did fight in World War II, which you'll kind of notice as a theme, especially going post-50s. And post World War II, I should say, in terms of your presidents. He is going to be a member of the House. He'll be a senator for California for a couple of years, and then eventually he gets tapped on the shoulder by Dwight D. Eisenhower to be his VP when he runs for president. And Eisenhower, of course, wins. So Richard Nixon's going to be the vice president from 1952 up until 1960. When Eisenhower's terms are coming to an end, Nixon decides that he wants to go ahead and run as the Republican nominee for president in 1960. But he runs against JFK, the Democrat. And here was kind of a problem for Nixon. Televisions were becoming massive, so pretty much everybody had a television in their home. So this 1960 debate between Nixon and Kennedy becomes the first presidential debate to actually be on television. And you might not think this, but it's just the case. Anyone that you see on TV today, I don't care if it's a newscaster, a sports star, whatever it may be, they are wearing makeup. And the reason is because the camera, really kind of highlights everything. The lights are so bright. You really need the makeup on to make sure that you look good. Well, Nixon refused to wear it. He's like, I'm not wearing that. Get that away from me. Go away. So when Nixon gets on camera, he's sweaty, he's blotchy, and really to viewers watching at home, they were like, okay, this guy can't handle the job. But JFK, looking dapper, looking suave, looking good, they were like, okay, he's definitely going to be a lot more capable of handling the presidential role. And so Kennedy's going to win in 1960. Nixon loses. He's going to run for the governor of California in 1962, and he's going to lose that election as well. And after that, he was kind of done with politics. He was like, no more. This is not for me. This just isn't going to work out. And so he kind of basically takes a break, but by 1968 decides to give things another go. In 1968, the country was really in turmoil. The civil rights movement is in full effect. You have protests breaking out around the country. The distaste for Vietnam and the war itself and the anti-Vietnam War protests also breaking out across the country. You can really look at 1968 and compare it to 2020, how people were protesting the COVID lockdown, George Floyd, all those different things are also kind kind of like very similar to 1968, that all these problems are sort of coming to a head. And so Nixon, as a result, he's going to run for the presidency. And he's really going to run on this idea of, I'm going to end the Vietnam War, and I'm going to run on this idea of law and order, aka we see a lot of turmoil happening in our country. It's time to sort of rein things in. And eventually he's going to win that presidential election in 1968 and become president. Spiro Agnew is going to be his VP. And one thing that I really want you to kind of keep in mind about Richard Nixon, he was a very paranoid man. He really did believe that anybody and everybody was out to get him. He would record conversations with people without their knowledge. This becomes later known as the Nixon tapes. But he really sort of felt that people were just constantly looking for ways to get him, to spite him, whatever it may be. So he was really distrustworthy of just about everybody in his life. So Nixon's going to be very different than the previous president, Lyndon B. Johnson. Johnson, had this idea of like the Great Society of not everyone in America is great. Yes, you have a strong middle class. Yes, you have some rich people, but you also got poor people as well. People who are homeless, people who need food stamps, people who just need an extra hand. And Johnson really believed that it was government's role and government's responsibility to help with those things. So if someone doesn't have enough money to feed themselves, the government should provide food stamps. If, somebody doesn't have enough money to afford good health care, then the government should help provide for those things. If someone doesn't have enough money to get a good quality education from the ages to 3 to 5, then it should be the government's responsibility to help out with those things. Those are what we call more liberal policies, aka the government is doing more to help people, especially when they're in need. Well, Nixon's a conservative. He's a Republican. Conservatism is kind of the exact opposite of that, of it's not government's job to help everybody. And frankly, how can we as the government help everybody? It's not going to be plausible. So this idea that if everyone doesn't have enough food, we're going to feed everybody, that's going to cost money. Where's that money going to come from? How do you help those things? So when Nixon gets elected, he really kind of takes a lot of these Great Society programs and really tries to disband them. This idea that government's going to help everybody, he didn't necessarily agree with, especially when it came to the federal government. If California wants to help their poor people, Nixon's like, let California help their poor people. But that doesn't mean that we, the federal government, is going to dictate how California, how Tennessee, how Florida, how Ohio spend their money. It should be up to the local governments to decide how they spend their money, how the states should spend that money. That's really what conservatism is less federal government, more state and local governments. We here living in Lake Elsinore, California, can probably decide what's better for Lake Elsinore, California than the folks at Washington, D.C. That's kind of the idea behind conservatism. They also want less government, aka government shouldn't necessarily help out everybody. So Nixon really wants to give more control to the states, but something else that was really frustrating to Richard Nixon was the fact that with the Warren Court, those who are criminally accused had more rights, or there were definitely a lot more protected. With Gideon versus Wainwright, if you can't afford an attorney, the state has to provide one for you. Well, guess what? The state's now going to have to pay for those things. So they've got to move around tax dollars or increase taxes to pay for those things. Now, to get evidence from your home, you have to have a search warrant. Different things that, again, kind of like secured the accused rights. Well, again, Nixon runs on this idea of law and order. The country's in turmoil. We need to sort of rein it in. So he's really not a fan of the fact of things like Miranda versus Arizona, where your rights have to be read to you. Or again, Escobedo versus Illinois, that when you ask for your attorney, you get for one. So when it came to the Supreme Court, he really wants to appoint more conservative judges. And he's going to start doing that, especially when Earl Warren retires. He's going to appoint a couple of conservative judges to the court that aren't going to rein in Miranda versus Arizona or Gideon versus Wainwright, but they're certainly not going to seek to extend, rights and secure rights for the criminally accused. And really where Nixon's going to kind of make his mark, especially when it comes to his presidency, is really going to be in foreign policy. Domestic policy, aka what's going on here in the United States, really wasn't that much of a concern to him. Not to say that he didn't do anything, but really he sort of makes his mark in terms of like policy and things that he did is going to come in foreign policy. Because there are two major things that are happening throughout the world. One is the Vietnam War, which we know by 1968 was increasingly unpopular. Americans were frustrated with the fact that tons of money is being spent on Vietnam. It's a war that the Americans aren't winning. Communism doesn't seem to be disappearing. Young men are being drafted. They're being sent over. And so anti-Vietnam protests are going to erupt around the country. My dad, when he was able to vote for the presidency for the first time, he goes, the man that I voted for was Richard Nixon, because he said he was going to get us out of Vietnam. I didn't want to be sent to the war to die, so that guy had my vote. And really one of the key factors that's going to kind of help Nixon shape his foreign policy is going to be a man by the name of Henry Kissinger. He had worked for both the Kennedy and the Johnson administration. He's going to be appointed as the National Security Advisor and eventually make his way up to Secretary of State. And he's really going to be the one that's kind of going to help advise Nixon on here's what you should do in terms of foreign policy to sort of make the world a better place to live in. When looking at Vietnam, he was like, look, we know Vietnam's unpopular. You ran on this idea that we're going to end the Vietnam War. That's right. We got to get out. But you can't just pull all the money and the boys at once. It's just not going to be effective. It's like sometimes when you take certain medications, doctors can't just tell you to stop. They have to wean you off that medication before you can officially stop taking it. That was kind of the idea with the Vietnam War. You can't just pull thousands of troops and go, sorry, South Vietnam, you're on your own. You have to gradually pull back. And this becomes known as Vietnamization of let's kind of support the South Vietnamese, but let's lessen American support, in the hopes that the South Vietnamese will be able to defend their own country. We know it's not going to officially work because by 1975, Vietnam's going to become a completely communist country. But again, U.S. involvement by the late 60s starts to kind of really just die down. It does expand momentarily when Nixon decides to bomb both Cambodia and Laos. But the idea with Nixon's campaign was, let's reel back in the support we've been giving in the Vietnam War. It was also really important to Nixon to honor alliances, aka NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, that started in 1949 and really sort of grew as like the Warsaw Pact with the communist countries is growing. Because again, we're still in the midst of a Cold War, communism versus capitalism, East versus West, NATO versus the Warsaw Pact. The problem with NATO at this time is that America was really kind of funding everything when it came to NATO. So Nixon was like, listen, alliances are important. You want to have friends, you want to have countries that you can go to, but we also need to make sure that everyone's paying their fair share. So he really wanted other countries that were a part of the NATO alliance to also pay as well. But of course, it's not just the Vietnam War that Nixon's basically struggling with, or having to deal with, I should say. It's also the Cold War as well. Again, because the Cold War is going to rage on until really the early 1990s. So when it came to the Soviet Union and communism in general, tensions are still very high. And tensions had really, of course, been high since 1949 when the Cold War officially began. The United States believed in capitalism. The Soviet Union believed in communism. Strike one. Nuclear arms race. The Americans build an atomic bomb. The Soviets do it. The Americans build a hydrogen bomb. The Soviets do it. And of course, by 1962, you have the Cuban Missile Crisis. I mean, you literally have a civil war, or not even a civil war, an apocalypse that's going to break out throughout the world. So tensions have been very high. The space race, again, things also hadn't been going so well with the space race. The Soviets put a satellite in space. Oh crap, America's got to catch up. We got to do the same thing. So because of all these problems, even by like the 1970s, tensions are still really high between the two countries. Containment was definitely still a thing. This idea of like, we can't necessarily stop communism, but let's contain it and keep it from spreading. In some instances it worked, in some it didn't. It certainly didn't work in Vietnam. It did kind of work in Korea. You still have the 38th parallel, that DMZ, where North Korea is communist, South Korea is capitalist. So things have still been not extended past that even till this day. So Nixon definitely believed in containment of let's prevent communism from spreading. But Nixon's also like, look, we also can't live in a world where we're on this idea of brinkmanship all the time, where, every few months we have to wonder whether or not the Soviet Union is going to nuke the United States or the U.S. is going to nuke the Soviet Union. Like, we don't like each other, but that doesn't mean we can't find a way to get along. It's kind of like if you have someone at school you don't like. You may be able to, walk past the hallway, you don't say anything to one another, but if every time you see that person you don't like, you need punch them in the face, that's kind of a problem, because all it's going to do is create more tension and create more problems. And it's not just for you and the person you don't like, it's for everyone else around you. Nixon kind of understood that. Like, in order for the world to be a better place, we have to find different ways to get along. So really what he believed was this policy known as détente, which is a policy that attempts to relax or ease tension between nations. AKA, we don't have to like each other, but we do need to find a way to get along. We have to find a way to talk to one another and try to ease tensions between the countries. Again, really the Soviet Union and the United States. So there's going to be some things that Nixon sort of does. He's going to be the first U.S. president to visit communist China in 1949. China, of course, is going to undergo a communist revolution. And initially, the United States refused to recognize China as a country. Again, we're in the Cold War. We don't like communism. So the fact that China was turning communist, the U.S. was not thrilled about. But by the time Nixon comes in the office, he's kind of like, look, we can't ignore China anymore. They're growing, they're rising, communism is flourishing, and they definitely are becoming a superpower. We know that's the case even to this day. He's like, this idea that we're just going to ignore China and not acknowledge them, long term, it's not going to work. We have to do something. So when he goes to visit China, it's a pretty successful visit, but it's him sort of acknowledging, we know you're here. Again, we don't like you because you're communist, but again, we're going to have to work with what it is that we got. He's also going to be the first U.S. president to visit the Soviet Union since World War II. Again, tensions had been high between the two countries, whether it was the space race, ideologies, the nuclear arms race. But again, this idea that we're going to live in the world where, we might be fearful of a nuclear warfare breaking out every few months. It's just not logical. It's also just, it isn't going to work out for everybody. So for Nixon, he's like, again, we got to find a way to get along. So in his presidency, he's going to sign SALT. It's the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty. And the idea was, let's limit the strategic nuclear weapons. Does it mean we're going to get rid of all nuclear weapons? No. But Nixon was like, look, the Soviet Union has nuclear weapons, the United States has nuclear weapons, so why don't we do ourselves a favor, keep the nuclear weapons we got, but we don't necessarily need to increase them to like 20,000 apiece. We can have our nukes, know that we don't like one another, but again, we should be able to sit in a room and at least get along, and then we leave, let bygones be bygones. That was really kind of like Nixon's influence when it came to, the Cold War, was let's just sort of like reel things back in and find a way to just get along. And it really was sort of the best in terms of tensions between the Soviet Union and the United States really throughout the 1970s, where again, they didn't like each other, but they certainly weren't ready to kill one another either.